My name is Mark Bennett, and I never thought the sharpest wound I'd feel in my old age would come from my own family. One evening, while I sat at the dinner table, I'd helped pay for my son-in-law raised his glass and called me a loser in front of everyone. They laughed, thinking it was just a joke. But what they didn't know was that for 15 years, I had quietly carried nearly every bill, every car payment, every school tuition. The man they mocked as a failure had spent almost $1 million keeping their world afloat. That night, I made a choice that would shake their perfect lives to the core. Before we begin, I want to ask, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. The clinking of silverware against china filled the room, a steady background rhythm beneath the polished laughter that circled the mahogany table. Candles flickered in crystal holders, casting warm light on the feast my daughter had so carefully arranged to celebrate Sheldon's new promotion. I sat quietly at one end, more a guest than the father who had helped pay for this house, this table, even the wine they were drinking. I had brought that bottle myself, a congratulatory gift. Yet Sheldon swirled it in his glass as if it were his triumph alone. Then his voice cut through the chatter. "So, Mark, what's it like to be a loser?" His words floated in the air with a cruel levity that made the others laugh. Caroline forced a smile, but her eyes betrayed discomfort. My granddaughter Emma's fork paused mid-air, and Tommy. My grandson looked from me to his father, not fully understanding, but sensing the insult. I felt the sting sharp and undeniable, but I did not flinch. Instead, I set my fork down with careful precision and let the silence stretch. I had learned in my years as an engineer that silence often carried more weight than words. Yet in that silence, Sheldon mistook restraint for weakness. He leaned back in his chair, head tipped arrogantly, and continued. "You had a decent run as an engineer, sure, but that was decades ago. This world's different now. Faster. Digital. It takes younger men to succeed." His smirk widened as he gestured around the table, clearly enjoying the role of host in a home that without my steady hand behind the finances would have collapsed years ago. Caroline shifted uncomfortably. Her bracelet, my Christmas gift, the year before, glittered in the candlelight. She opened her mouth as if to defend me, then closed it again, trapped between loyalty to her father and fear of her husband's temper. Emma's small voice broke the tension. "But Grandpa built me a treehouse last summer." She said it with the innocent pride only a child could muster. For a moment, the cruelty at the table faltered. I caught her eye and offered the faintest smile. Sheldon patted her head in mock approval. "That's sweet, honey, but real men provide for their families with hard work, not by tinkering in backyards. Grandpa's just coasting now." The laughter that followed was brittle, but he didn't notice. He was too full of himself, drunk on both the wine and his new title. I kept my composure, though inside something heavy was beginning to shift. 15 years of support had turned into entitlement, and entitlement had curdled into mockery. I had promised my dying wife that I would help Caroline, and I had kept that promise beyond reason. But in that moment, I understood something new. Generosity without gratitude breeds contempt. I sipped my water slowly, letting the taste of insult settle on my tongue. The thought that struck me was not of revenge, but of revelation. If they truly saw me as a burden, then perhaps it was time to show them what my absence would mean. Tell me, if you were sitting at that table hearing your own son-in-law call you a failure, would you have spoken up or stayed silent as I did? Sheldon wasn't finished with me. His words lingered in the air, and he leaned forward, emboldened by what he thought was victory. "Let's be honest, Mark," he said, his voice oiled with false concern. "When was the last time you actually built something? Did something meaningful, Men like me carry the real weight these days. He let the sentence hang, savoring the sting he assumed would wound me. Caroline shifted again, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her glass. She murmured, "Sheldon Dad had a long career. He designed bridges and roads that still stand today." I felt a flicker of warmth at her defense, but it was drowned out almost instantly by his dismissive laugh. "Sure, sure, that was 40 years ago. But now, what's left? When was the last time you felt like a provider instead of just existing?" The words hit like a slap, not because they were true, but because they dismissed decades of sacrifice both for my family and for them. My granddaughter's wide eyes turned toward me again, and I could see the confusion in her gaze. To Emma, I was the man who built her treehouse, the one who showed her how to hammer nails straight and taught her which wood held strongest. To Tommy, I was the grandpa who showed up at his baseball games and paid for the new bat he swung with pride. But to their father, I was nothing more than a relic, someone whose usefulness had expired. I could feel Carolyn's shame fill the silence. Her nervous laugh was brittle, the sound of someone trying to stitch a wound too deep for words. "Maybe we should talk about something else," she said quickly. "Emma, tell Grandpa about your piano recital." She was desperate to steer the conversation away, but Sheldon wasn't ready to let go. He had drunk too much, and the arrogance of his promotion had made him bold. "You know," he continued, swirling the wine in his glass, as though the world belonged to him, "I've been thinking. Now that I'm making real money, maybe it's time everyone around here starts pulling their own weight. Caroline's been out of the workforce for years, living off, well, let's just call it family charity." Caroline's face drained of color. I could see her shame, her fear. Because we both knew the truth, without my quiet hand in the background, their world would crumble. The house, the private schools, the vacations, the cars, all of it had my fingerprints, though I had never sought acknowledgement. My grandson's voice, small but trembling, broke the silence. "Are we in trouble?" Dad Tommy's fork clattered to the plate, his innocence shattering in the tension. Sheldon smiled at him, as though he were teaching a lesson. "No, son. But you need to understand the difference between earners and dependents, between providers and here his eyes locked onto mine, those who've given up trying." The insult was sharp, deliberate. Caroline reached for her wine again, but her fingers shook too badly to grasp it. Emma's lip quivered, and then without warning, tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't rise to his bait, not yet. I only sat there, steady, calm. But inside a line had been crossed. The man I had propped up for 15 years had just taught my grandchildren to see me as worthless. He thought he was humiliating me. In truth, he was opening the door to his own undoing. If your own son-in-law dared to teach your grandchildren that you were nothing but a failure, how would you respond? The silence around that table was unbearable. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, louder than the sound of forks scratching plates. Everyone seemed frozen, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting me to laugh it off like an old fool too timid to defend himself. Sheldon leaned in closer, his smirk spreading. He thought he was the master of the evening, the new head of the family, finally putting me in my place. Then came the final strike. "Tell me, Mark," he asked, voice dripping with condescension. "How does it feel to be a failure?" Caroline gasped. Her wine glass nearly tipped over as she covered her mouth. Tommy stared wide-eyed, as if trying to comprehend the cruelty of the man he called Dad. Emma sobbed openly now, her tiny shoulders shaking. And me, I didn't flinch. Not once. I picked up my glass of water, took a slow sip, and placed it down with careful precision. My voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and sharper than any blade. "How does it feel, Sheldon?" I said, locking eyes with him to know that this failure will no longer be paying your bills. The words cut deeper than his insult ever could. His face drained of color, as if the blood had fled in panic. Caroline froze her hand, still covering her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. Tommy's fork slipped from his fingers and clattered to the plate, the sound ricocheting like a gunshot in the heavy air. For the first time that evening, Sheldon's mask of arrogance cracked. His smirk faltered, replaced by confusion, then fear. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but found no words. I sat there unhurried, slicing another piece of prime rib and chewing it as though nothing had happened. Every motion deliberate, controlled. Letting him and everyone at that table know the balance of power had shifted without me raising my voice. The candles flickered, shadows stretching across the walls as silence suffocated the room. Even Caroline's nervous laugh had vanished. She looked at me with something between horror and realization, as if she'd just glimpsed the magnitude of what 15 years of quiet generosity truly meant. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin and pushed my chair back slowly. "Thank you for dinner, Caroline," I said evenly. "It was delicious." Then I leaned down to kiss Emma and Tommy on their heads, whispering, "Good night, little ones." Their eyes followed me, full of confusion and fear, but also something else, maybe a flicker of respect they hadn't been allowed to feel before. Without raising my voice, without a single threat, I had set the course of what would come next. As I walked to the door, Sheldon sat frozen in his seat, stripped of his false dominance, left with nothing but the realization that the life he flaunted wasn't built on his own work. It was built on mine, and I had just announced it would all come crashing down. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you have stood up and walked away, or would you have unleashed years of bottled anger right there at the table? The sound of my chair sliding back against the hardwood floor echoed louder than Sheldon's laughter ever had. I could feel their eyes following me, but I refused to let them see anything other than composure. Inside, my chest burned with years of unspoken hurt, but outwardly I was calm, so calm it unsettled them more than if I had shouted. Caroline whispered, "Dad," but her voice faltered as I slipped on my coat from the closet. I didn't look back right away. Instead, I paused at the front door, my hand resting on the brass knob polished by years of Sunday visits. The same door my grandchildren used to burst through, carrying homemade drawings and sticky hugs back when gratitude still lived in this house. I turned then, just enough to meet Sheldon's eyes across the table. His face was pale, his earlier arrogance collapsing into something I'd never seen on him before: panic. Caroline sat rigid, her hand trembling on her wine glass, afraid to breathe. The children looked lost, too young to understand the full weight of what had just happened. "I'll say this once," I told them, my voice quiet but firm: "Don't mistake silence for weakness. And don't confuse kindness with obligation." Then I opened the door, the cool March air rushing in to clear away the suffocating tension inside. Stepping out, I felt the chill settle against my skin, but it was nothing compared to the frost I'd left behind at that dinner table. The night was still broken only by the distant barking of a neighbor's dog. I walked to my car slowly, deliberately, each step feeling like I was crossing an invisible line. By the time I slid behind the wheel and started the engine, I knew something in me had shifted. The drive home was 15 minutes of silence. No radio, no distractions, just me and the steady hum of the tires on asphalt. My hands gripped the wheel firmly, but not with anger. It was steadiness, the kind that comes when you know a decision has been made, and there's no turning back. I thought of my late wife, Martha, the promise I had made at her bedside. "Don't worry about Caroline, I'll take care of her," echoed in my mind. But what had that promise become? 15 years of sacrifice twisted into entitlement love, mistaken for a bank account. Pulling into my driveway, the motion sensor light flicked on, bathing the front steps in pale yellow. Shadows stretched long across the yard, reminding me of the years I had spent shrinking into the background of their lives. Tonight, that ended. Inside, the familiar scent of furniture polish and old books greeted me. I hung my coat carefully, then walked into my study. The brass desk lamp glowed as I flipped it on, illuminating the wall of filing cabinets I had meticulously organized. Blue folders for mortgage assistance, green for car loans, yellow for school tuition, red for medical bills. Each drawer a silent testimony to years of giving. I pulled one open, the papers whispering as they slid against each other. Row after row of receipts, checks, and statements stared back at me. I realized I hadn't just been supporting them, I had been carrying them, quietly, invisibly, and without thanks. That night, staring at nearly $1 million worth of paper proof, I knew my revenge would not come with shouting or broken plates. It would come with silence and the absence of my hand holding them up. If it were you, would you have walked away like I did, or confronted them with the evidence right there on the table? The warm glow from my brass desk lamp spread across the papers as I pulled another drawer open. The numbers leapt at me in neat rows, each one a reminder of the life I had funded but never lived. $2,800 a month for their mortgage, $650 for Sheldon's BMW lease, $24,000 annually for the children's private schools, bills for medical emergencies, vacation receipts, credit card balances quietly erased. The sum was staggering, nearly $1 million over 15 years. I sat back in my leather chair, the one Martha had given me on our 20th anniversary. My fingers traced the worn armrest as her voice echoed in memory. "Promise me you'll take care of Caroline." I had promised, and I had kept that promise. But what neither of us had imagined was that generosity could morph into a weapon against me, used to strip away dignity rather than preserve family. The house was silent save for the faint hum of the heater. I stared at the mountain of receipts and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was what Sheldon wanted, what he fed on. No, what I felt now was clarity, an engineer's clarity, the kind that comes when you finally see a structure's weak point and know exactly how to dismantle it. I pulled out my notebook, the one I had used to track every transfer. With deliberate strokes, I began making a new list, not of payments, but of cancellations. Mortgage assistance terminated. Insurance premiums discontinued. School tuition transfers ceased. Auto loans no longer my concern. One by one, I wrote them down, each word like a nail sealing the coffin of their entitlement. My pen slowed only when I thought of Emma and Tommy. Their innocence weighed heavily on me. They hadn't asked for any of this. They loved me, truly loved me, not for what I gave, but for who I was, the grandpa who built treehouses, the man who never missed a recital or game. They would suffer from their parents' arrogance, and that knowledge hurt. But shielding them entirely meant perpetuating the same cycle. No, they needed parents who stood on their own 2 feet. And maybe, just maybe, watching the scaffolding of unearned comfort fall away would teach them lessons their parents had forgotten. I closed the last folder and stacked it neatly. The papers no longer felt like chains. They were evidence, testimony of a father's love stretched too thin. And now they would become my armor. At that moment, I made a vow to myself. There would be no yelling, no public spectacle. My revenge would be silent, efficient, undeniable. I would dismantle 15 years of dependency with the same precision I once used to design bridges. They would wake to a world where bills didn't pay themselves, where choices had consequences, and where respect had to be earned, not demanded. I turned off the lamp and sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the quiet creak of the house around me. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like freedom. If you discovered your family had drained nearly $1 million of your life without gratitude, would you keep giving, or would you, like me, finally let go? The next morning, I returned to my study with a cup of strong coffee and the resolve of a man who had reached his limit. The sun filtered weakly through the curtains, painting faint stripes across the mountain of paperwork that now felt less like clutter and more like confession. I opened the blue-labeled drawer marked Mortgage Assistance and pulled the first folder free. February 2009, 2800, March 2009, 2800. The pattern repeated month after month, year after year, 180 months, each one identical. My calculator confirmed what my weary memory had already suspected: just over $500,000 for a house that bore Sheldon's name, but not his sweat. I ran a finger down the neat columns of payments, each check I had written, as though it were nothing more than pocket change. Next came the green-labeled folders, auto loans. Sheldon's BMW lease alone had bled $650 every month, while Caroline's SUV required another $450. Together, nearly $150,000 had vanished over 8 years. I could see the gleaming vehicles in my mind, how Sheldon used to boast about them, to neighbors claiming shrewd financial planning as the secret. All the while, I drove my old truck content to let them shine while I carried the burden. The yellow folders, school tuition. These were the hardest to face. Tommy's education from kindergarten through 7th grade, Emma's through 4th. Annual tuition bills of $24,000, sometimes more, when extracurriculars were added in. In total, nearly $200,000 spent to ensure my grandchildren walked into classrooms lined with privilege. I had wanted them to have every opportunity just as Martha would have. I had told myself it was an investment in their future, but the sting came not from the money, but from the way Sheldon paraded the children's schooling as his personal accomplishment. Finally, the red folders, medical bills. Insurance premiums during Sheldon's job losses, emergency surgeries, braces, therapy sessions. Over $120,000 in total. Each receipt, a reminder of nights I'd driven them to the hospital, of checks I'd written without hesitation, because family came first. By the time I closed the last folder, the total had crept to $976,200. Nearly $1 million money that could have secured my retirement, funded the travel dreams Martha and I once held, maybe even allowed me to remarry without fear of being used. Instead, it had been poured into a life that wasn't mine. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as the truth settled like concrete in my chest. This wasn't generosity anymore. It was servitude. I had been their silent financier, their safety net, their invisible foundation. And rather than gratitude, I'd been rewarded with scorn. My pen moved across the notebook almost on its own. Mortgage terminate, auto loans terminate, tuition terminate, insurance terminate. Each word steadied me like bolts tightening a bridge. I wasn't abandoning them. I was ending a cycle that should never have lasted 15 years. The bitterness faded as clarity took its place. I wasn't just canceling payments. I was reclaiming my life. If you discovered your sacrifices had been turned into expectations, would you keep carrying that weight? Or would you finally set it down as I had decided to do? Saturday morning dawned quiet with the faint chirp of sparrows outside my kitchen window. I carried my coffee into the study, the weight of last night's decision pressing down like an anchor. My notebook lay open on the desk, a list of every automatic payment I had ever shouldered for Caroline and Sheldon. One by one, those obligations would end today. I reached for the phone, my hand steady. The first number on the list. First National Bank. The line clicked, and a pleasant female voice answered. Account services, this is Jennifer. How may I help you? I cleared my throat, speaking in the same measured tone I'd once used for engineering presentations. Yes, I need to cancel an automatic transfer. Checking account ending in 42156. It covers a mortgage payment $2,800 monthly. Jennifer asked for my social security digits and verified the account. I could hear the faint tapping of her keyboard on the other end. "All right, Mr. Bennett," she said after a pause, "those payments have now been discontinued. You will no longer be responsible for this mortgage." Her words were simple, clinical, but to me they carried the weight of revolution. 15 years dismantled in 12 minutes. I wrote down the confirmation number carefully in my notebook, drawing a small check mark beside the mortgage entry. Next came Colorado Mountain Insurance. That call took longer, requiring transfers between supervisors and 2 rounds of security verification. But in the end, the voice on the other end confirmed it: no more premiums leaving my account. BMW Financial followed. After 3 transfers and 30 minutes on hold, the payment cancellation was processed. "You understand, this may result in repossession if the primary account holder does not make alternate arrangements," the representative asked. "Yes," I replied simply. My pen scratched across the page another checkmark. With each call, my burden lightened. The steady rhythm of confirmation numbers filled my notebook, a symphony of release. By 11:15 a.m., 8 obligations were gone. Mortgage, insurance, car payments, all terminated with the precision of a surgeon cutting away dead weight. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The quiet of the house wasn't oppressive anymore. It was liberating. Then the phone rang. Caroline's name flashed across the screen. I let it buzz twice before answering. "Dad," she said, her voice high and trembling. "Something weird happened with our mortgage payment. The bank called. They said it bounced. But that doesn't make sense. It's always been automatic." I closed my eyes, inhaling slowly. "It bounced," I said, "because I canceled it." Silence. I could hear her breathing quicken on the other end, a thin gasp of disbelief. "What do you mean you canceled it? You can't just—" "Yes, I can," I interrupted. "And I did. As of this morning, you and Sheldon are responsible for your own bills." Her words tumbled out in a rush laced with panic. "Dad, please, you can't do this. The mortgage, the insurance, Tommy's school. All discontinued." My tone was calm, deliberate. "You assumed I'd pay forever. You were wrong." The line went dead a second later. I sat in the quiet, my pen poised over the notebook, and checked off another line. The war had begun, and this time I wasn't the one carrying the cost. If you were in my place, would you have felt guilt cutting them off, or relief like I did? It didn't take long for the storm to break. Less than 2 hours after our brief call, my phone rang again. This time, Caroline's voice was sharper, brittle with fear. "Dad, the school just called. They said the tuition payment for Tommy and Emma didn't go through." "What's happening?" I let her words hang in the air a moment before answering. "What's happening," I said calmly, "is that I stopped paying." Her gasp sliced through the line. "You can't, Dad. This isn't funny. The kids will be pulled out of school." "Do you realize what this means?" "I realize it's time you and Sheldon take responsibility for the life you've built. I've carried it for 15 years. That ends now." There was a pause, and then her voice cracked higher, thinner. "But we can't afford it. The mortgage, the cars, the school, everything, Dad. We'll lose the house." Her words hit me, but not the way she intended. I thought back to that house. The renovations, the new kitchen, the luxury appliances, the gleaming marble countertops Sheldon boasted about at every neighborhood barbecue. All of it paid for by my failure of a wallet. You should have thought about that before I said, my voice steady. Before you let your husband mock me at the dinner table. Before you let gratitude die in your heart. For a moment I heard only her breathing, fast, shallow, panicked. Then her tone shifted softer, pleading. Dad, you promised Mom you'd take care of me. Remember, at her funeral, you said I'd be secure. You can't go back on that. I shut my eyes. The memory of Martha's funeral rose in my mind, the gray sky, Caroline weeping against my chest, my whispered vow to a dying wife. Until she's stable, I had promised. But 15 years had passed. Caroline wasn't stable, she was dependent. And Martha, if she could see this, would never have wanted me enslaved by my own love. I kept that promise, I said finally, for a decade and a half. But what I gave became expected, not appreciated. That's not what your mother wanted for you. Her voice broke into sobs. Dad, please. What about the children that cut deeper than anything? Emma's drawings still hung on my refrigerator. Tommy's baseball glove sat in the corner of my study from the last time he'd left it there. They were innocent in all this. My grandchildren didn't deserve the fallout of their parents' arrogance. I'll never turn my back on them, I said firmly. But from now on, my help will go directly to them, not through you and Sheldon. If Tommy needs tuition, I'll pay the school myself. If Emma needs medical care, I'll cover it with the doctor. But you and Sheldon, you'll stand on your own. There was a long silence, punctuated only by her quiet sobbing. Finally, she whispered, I don't know how we'll survive. You'll survive the way the rest of us do, I replied, by working for it. When the call ended, I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the sparrows squabbled over crumbs in the yard. Life went on indifferent to her panic. I picked up my pen, checked off another line in my notebook, and whispered to myself one step closer. Tell me if your own child cried that way. Would you have softened and relented or stayed firm as I did? By Sunday afternoon, the storm I had expected finally arrived at my doorstep. Through the front window, I watched Sheldon's BMW screech to a stop in my driveway. The door slammed with unnecessary force, and a moment later, Caroline emerged from the passenger seat, clutching her purse like a shield. Her eyes were red, her face pale. Sheldon's expression was something else entirely, anger dressed up as authority. I opened the door before they could knock. Please come in, I said evenly, stepping aside. They entered without a word of thanks, storming into my living room, as though they still held some kind of moral high ground. Sheldon planted himself in the center of the room, chest puffed out. This tantrum of yours ends now, he barked. You will call those banks, and you will restore every payment you canceled. Today. I didn't move. Instead, I gestured toward the couch. Sit down. If we're going to discuss this, it'll be as adults. Caroline sank into the cushions, her hands trembling in her lap. Sheldon remained standing, glaring down at me like a man accustomed to getting his way. No, I said calmly. I won't call anyone. The payments are finished. His face flushed red, his voice rising. You can't just cut us off. There are legal obligations, verbal contracts. I almost laughed. Show me the contract where I agreed to pay your bills forever. Bring me the paperwork, Sheldon. You'll find none. Caroline's voice broke through, softer but no less desperate. Dad, please. Think about Mom. Think about the promise you made at her funeral. I had been expecting that. It was their last weapon, the memory of Martha. My jaw tightened, but I didn't flinch. I promised to help until you were stable. 15 years and nearly $1 million later, you're less stable than the day I started. Caroline's lips parted, a whisper escaping. $1 million, I walked calmly to my desk and pulled open the top drawer. My notebook lay ready, each page filled with dates, amounts, and confirmation numbers. I flipped it open and laid it on the coffee table. 976,200. Mortgage assistance, car loans, insurance, school tuition, medical bills, vacations, every dime accounted for. Sheldon's bluster faltered. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. That's impossible. We never asked for that much. You never asked for anything, I corrected him. You just expected it. And I gave it. Quietly. Consistently. Until last night when you mocked me in front of my grandchildren. Caroline covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Sheldon paced the carpet like a caged animal, fists clenching and unclenching. You can't divide this family, he snapped. We're a team. I met his glare evenly. Teams require mutual respect. Tell me, Sheldon, when was the last time you thanked me for anything? Silence. The kind of silence that suffocates. Caroline's sobs filled the void, soft and broken. Sheldon looked away, unable to answer. I leaned forward. Here's the truth. I'm not your ATM, I'm your father-in-law, and I won't be treated as anything less. If your own family stood in your living room demanding you keep paying their bills, would you have caved, or would you like me finally drawn the line? The showdown in my living room left the air heavy, but it didn't end there. When people live off appearances as much as Caroline and Sheldon did, word spreads fast once the facade starts to crack, and this time I wasn't going to protect them with silence. It started Monday morning. My neighbor Dave, who's never missed a beat in this town, stopped me on my walk. Mark, I heard some chatter last night at Murphy's bar, he said. Sheldon was telling folks you'd abandoned your family. Said you cut off the kids' school and left them hanging. His eyes searched mine for confirmation. I looked him square in the face. Dave, I've paid nearly $1 million for that family over 15 years. Mortgage, cars, tuition, insurance, medical bills, even their vacations. And last week my son-in-law called me a failure at the dinner table. Dave's eyebrows shot up. $1 million, every penny documented, I said, tapping the notebook under my arm. I never abandoned them. I just stopped enabling them. By the end of the day, it seemed half the neighborhood knew the story. At the grocery store, Mrs. Payne approached me with a frown. Mark, I can't believe you'd turn your back on your daughter like that. Caroline says the children don't understand why Grandpa doesn't love them anymore. Her accusation cut deep, but I held my ground. Mrs. Payne, do you know what love looks like? It looks like $9,200 in support. It looks like 15 years of bills quietly paid, so those children could have the best schools, the safest home, the nicest vacations. I didn't stop loving them. I stopped being used. Her righteous anger melted into stunned silence. That much, yes, I replied. And I've got every receipt to prove it. Within days, the narrative shifted. The whispers at church no longer carried pity for Caroline and Sheldon, but something colder, skepticism. Neighbors who once admired Sheldon's BMW now asked how he could afford it on his salary. Parents at the academy whispered about whose tuition was truly being covered. The image Sheldon had crafted so carefully was unraveling thread by thread. Caroline called midweek, her voice cracking with desperation. Dad, people are asking questions we can't answer. They're saying you've been telling lies. I haven't lied once, I said. I've only told the truth when asked. You two built a house of cards on my back. Now the wind's blowing and it's collapsing. Her sobbing filled the line, but I didn't soften. You let Sheldon mock me in front of your children, I reminded her. You've let entitlement replace gratitude. The truth was bound to come out. By Friday, even Sheldon seemed shaken. Word reached me from another neighbor that he'd been confronted at Murphy's bar by Bill Henderson, the car salesman who leased him that BMW. Tell me Sheldon Bill had asked how'd you swing 60 grand on your salary, or was that Mark's money too? The bar had gone silent. Sheldon didn't answer. He couldn't. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to humiliate them myself. The truth spoken quietly and backed by proof was louder than any insult Sheldon had thrown at me. If your community discovered the truth that you'd carried your family's life for 15 years, would you feel shame? Or would you feel, as I did, a heavy relief that the mask was finally gone by the time spring rolled in? The cracks in Caroline and Sheldon's carefully curated life had widened into chasms. It didn't happen all at once, it never does. Collapse comes slowly, piece by piece, until the entire structure buckles under the weight of truth. The first sign came in the form of an envelope taped to their front door. A foreclosure notice, bold and unmistakable, visible to anyone walking by. My neighbor Dave mentioned it to me first. Saw the county sticker on Caroline's place last night. He said, shaking his head. 30 days. That's all they've got to cover. 3 months of missed payments, plus penalties. $8,625. I didn't feign surprise. I knew it was coming, I replied simply. That house was never theirs. It was mine in disguise. Days later, the BMW disappeared from their driveway. Mrs. Payne told me she'd seen Sheldon at the Honda dealership. His shoulders slumped as Caroline filled out paperwork. By Wednesday, a faded Civic sat in place of the shiny black luxury car he once bragged about at barbecues. No more polished speeches about hard work paying off. Just an old car that matched their real income at last. Caroline wasn't spared either. I spotted her one evening at the grocery store where I usually shop. She was behind the checkout counter, wearing a blue vest with a name tag clipped to it. Her once manicured hands scanned items across the conveyor belt, her smile forced as customers passed. When Mrs. Patterson walked up to her lane, Caroline's face turned crimson. "Caroline, dear, I didn't know you were working here," Mrs. Patterson said with mild surprise. Caroline didn't meet her eyes. Started Monday, she muttered, bagging groceries as fast as she could. Paper or plastic. Later that evening, Tommy called me on the phone. His voice trembled with the confusion only a child could carry. "Grandpa," he whispered, "Mom and Dad are fighting again. Dad says Mom's job doesn't pay enough. Mom says Dad never made enough either. They said mean things about you, too." "What kind of things, buddy?" I asked gently. "That you ruined everything on purpose." He paused, his voice breaking. But then Mom started crying and said maybe they ruined it themselves. I closed my eyes, my heart twisting. This wasn't the lesson I wanted my grandchildren to learn, not like this, not through shouting matches in the next room. But sometimes the harshest lessons leave the deepest impressions. The following morning, I walked past their house during my usual route. Through the thin walls, I could hear the raised voices. Caroline's sharp 8 hours on my feet for peanuts, followed by Sheldon's bitter retort. 15 years of handouts, and you still don't appreciate it. A door slammed, and his Civic sputtered to life as he drove off. From across the street, little Emma peeked through the window. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with worry. When she noticed me, she lifted her small hand in a timid wave. I raised mine in return, my throat tight. They were crumbling under the weight of their own choices, and for the first time, I let them. If you were in my position, would you have stepped in to rescue them again, or watched as I did, knowing that sometimes only the fall teaches us how to stand? It was Thursday afternoon when Emma showed up at my door, her small fists clutching the straps of her backpack. She looked so different from the carefree girl who used to bounce in with glitter-covered art projects. Her eyes were heavy and her smile hesitant. "Grandpa," she asked softly, "why is everything different now?" I knelt down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What feels different, sweetheart?" She bit her lip. "Mom's always tired. She cries at night. Dad yells about bills. They talk about losing the house. Tommy heard them say we might have to change schools. Is it because of you?" The question landed like a weight in my chest. I lifted her into the kitchen and set her down at the table, sliding a plate of cookies and a glass of milk her way. She nibbled at one, eyes darting up to me nervously. "No, Emma," I said carefully. "It's not because of you, and it's not because of me. It's because grown-ups sometimes forget what's important. They make choices, and those choices catch up with them." She stared at her cookie, crumbling it between her fingers. "Tommy says maybe they should have said thank you more." Those words pierced me more deeply than anything Sheldon had ever said. Out of the mouths of children came the truth adults refused to speak. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced myself to stay steady. "Tommy's a smart boy," I whispered. That evening, I got another call from Caroline. Her voice was ragged with exhaustion. "Dad, we're drowning. Sheldon's paycheck doesn't cover half of it. My job at the store." She broke off, her sob muffled through the line. "It's not enough. The bank's calling. The school sent another notice. Dad, the kids are terrified." I let the silence stretch, though my heart ached. Finally, I answered, "Maybe the children will learn something their parents never did. That nothing in life is guaranteed, and gratitude matters more than pride." Her sobbing grew louder, but I didn't waver. I thought of Emma's timid wave through the window the day before, of Tommy's phone call telling me his parents were fighting. I couldn't take away their pain, but I could make sure they learned. Pain teaches where comfort fails. A few nights later, Emma returned again, this time with Tommy in tow. They sat in my living room, their voices quieter than I'd ever heard. Grandpa Tommy asked, "Are we really going to have to move?" Mom said, "Maybe." Dad said, "Probably." I looked at their anxious faces and felt the tug of my heart. "If you do move," I said gently, "it won't change how much I love you. Houses are just walls and roofs. Family is what matters." Emma leaned into my arm, whispering, "I wish Dad didn't make you sad." I swallowed hard. "So do I, sweetheart. So do I." In that moment, I realized something powerful. My revenge wasn't just shaking Sheldon's pride, it was revealing the truth to the only people who still mattered, my grandchildren. And they were beginning to see through the lies. If your grandchildren came to you with such questions, would you tell them the hard truth or soften it with comforting lies? It was late on a Saturday afternoon when I heard a timid knock at my door. I opened it to find Caroline standing there, still wearing her blue grocery store vest. Her shoulders were slumped, her hair pulled back hastily, and her eyes red-rimmed from too many sleepless nights. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad," she whispered, "please. We need to talk." I stepped aside and she walked into the living room, collapsing into the same chair Sheldon had stormed into weeks earlier. But this time there was no arrogance, no entitlement. Just a woman stripped down to desperation. She tugged at her name tag until it snapped off, tossing it on the coffee table. Her hands shook as she buried her face in them. 4 days, she murmured. That's all we have before the bank completes the foreclosure. Tommy keeps asking if we're really going to lose the house. Emma had nightmares last night about moving into some strange place. Her voice cracked. I don't know what to tell them anymore. I sat opposite her, studying the daughter I had once promised to protect. She looked smaller, somehow diminished by the weight of choices she and her husband had made. For the first time in years, there was no defensiveness in her tone, only raw honesty. "What do you want from me, Carolyn?" I asked gently. She lifted her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "I want stability for my children. I want them to finish the school year with their friends. I want Emma to sleep without crying. I want Tommy to stop hearing us fight every night." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Dad, I just want to stop failing them." Her words cut deeper than any insult ever had. I thought of Martha, of the promise I made at her bedside, and for a moment the urge to step in and fix everything almost consumed me, but I steadied myself. "Caroline, listen carefully. I'll help Tommy and Emma. I'll pay their tuition directly to the school. I'll cover their clothes, their medical care, their activities, and even set up college funds for them. They will never go without because of me." Her eyes widened with relief, but before she could speak, I raised a hand. "But you and Sheldon. No more mortgages, no more cars, no more adult bills. You two will live within your means, whatever those are." Her face fell. "Dad, we can't." "You can," I interrupted. "You'll have to. That's the only way this changes." She sat silently absorbing my words. Then she asked, her voice barely audible, "What about Sheldon?" I leaned forward. "He has a choice. I want public acknowledgement of the truth, 15 years and nearly $1 million I've given. I want sincere public apologies. Letters, posts, face to face. Not for me, but for honesty. For your children to know the truth instead of lies." Caroline's lip trembled. "He'll never agree. His pride." "Then his pride is worth more to him than his children's future," I said flatly. She wept then, not the theatrical tears of manipulation, but the heavy sobs of a woman finally confronting her reality. For the first time in years, I believed she saw the truth. If your own child came to you in pieces, would you rescue them from the wreckage, or let them rebuild with their own hands? As I chose, Carolyn's sobs quieted to shallow breaths. She sat hunched in my chair, twisting a tissue between her fingers, her eyes swollen but searching. "If we do this," she whispered, "if Sheldon agrees, what exactly do you expect?" I leaned forward, my hands resting on my knees. "Clarity, honesty, and respect." She blinked, uncertain. I continued, "I'll take care of the children's school clothes, medical needs, even future college funds. But for you and Sheldon, no more mortgage payments, no more car loans, no more adult responsibilities offloaded onto me. You'll live within your income. That's non-negotiable." She nodded faintly, though her lips trembled. "We could downsize, move somewhere smaller." "Yes," I said, "you could. And you'll learn what it means to budget, to earn what you spend." Her shoulders slumped, and the apologies I sat back, letting the words weigh heavy in the air. Public acknowledgement. I want a letter in the community paper thanking me for 15 years of support. I want an honest post on social media explaining what I've done for your family. And I want face-to-face apologies to the neighbors you misled these last weeks while Sheldon played victim at the bar. Caroline winced, pressing the tissue to her lips. "He'll never agree. You don't know how stubborn he is." I gave a short laugh. "Caroline, I know exactly how stubborn he is. But pride doesn't feed children. Pride doesn't keep the lights on. And if he cares more about saving face than saving his family, then you'll know where his true loyalty lies." She flinched at that, but didn't argue. Her silence told me she knew it was true. "You have 48 hours, I said. After that, the offer is gone. The foreclosure will go through, and I'll help Emma and Tommy in other ways. But you and Sheldon will stand alone." Caroline's eyes filled again, but this time she didn't break down. Instead, she drew a shaky breath and squared her shoulders, like someone steeling themselves for battle. I'll talk to him. But if he refuses, then you'll have to decide if your children's stability is worth more than your husband's ego, I said firmly. She rose slowly, her grocery store vest wrinkled and stained from the day's work. At the door, she turned back, her face lined with exhaustion, but softened by something I hadn't seen in years, humility. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you for still caring about the kids." I met her eyes steadily. "Caroline, I never stopped caring about any of you. I just stopped letting myself be taken for granted." When she left, I sat in the silence of my living room, Martha's photograph watching over me from the mantel. For the first time since her death, I felt I was finally honoring her wish, not by endlessly shielding Caroline, but by forcing her to grow. The house seemed lighter, freer, as though even the walls understood a shift had taken place. I knew the next 48 hours would decide everything. If you were in my shoes, would you have given your child another chance with conditions, or cut the rope completely and walked away? The next evening I was in my study when headlights swept across my window. A moment later, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Sheldon stood there, not the arrogant man who once swaggered at my dinner table, but a hollowed figure. His shirt was wrinkled, tie-loosened eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. He looked older, smaller. "Mark," he muttered, "we need to talk. Just the two of us." I stepped aside. He entered slowly, as if the air itself weighed him down. He didn't sit in my armchair this time. Instead, he lowered himself onto the couch. Elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight, like a man awaiting judgment. "The foreclosure is real," he said finally. His voice lacked all the bravado I had come to expect. 30 days left. Caroline's working 40 hours a week at the store brings home about $1,100 after taxes. I make $5,800 a month. The mortgage alone is $2,875. It's impossible. We can't make it work. Not even close. I watched him struggle, the silence pressing. For once, he didn't try to fill it with excuses. He shook his head slowly. "We never could. Could we without you, I mean?" "No," I said quietly. "You never could." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I've been thinking about what you said. About earning respect versus inheriting it. I never earned anything, did I? The house, the cars, the schools, it was all you? And I let everyone believe it was me." His voice cracked. "I let my own kids believe it. I let him sit in that admission because truth is heavy and it must be felt before it can change a man." "What do you want from me, Sheldon?" I asked at last. He swallowed hard. "I want to know if there's a way back. Not to the way things were, I know that's gone. But forward. To something better." I studied him, weighing whether this humility was real or just desperation dressed in softer tones. "There is a way forward," I said carefully. "But it requires something you've never been willing to give: humility. Publicly. You and Caroline must acknowledge the truth. Apologize sincerely and openly. Not just to me, but to the community you lied to. Admit that you lived off my support for 15 years. He stiffened, pride flashing in his eyes. "You want me to humiliate myself?" "No," I corrected. "I want you to tell the truth. Your children deserve to grow up knowing their father can admit when he's wrong. That's not humiliation, it's integrity." Sheldon stared at the floor for a long time, his jaw working, his fists tightening and loosening. Finally, he exhaled a sound halfway between defeat and relief. "Caroline said you'd demand this. I told her I'd never do it. But maybe pride is what got us here." He lifted his eyes to mine, raw and unguarded. "If I do this, if we both do this, will you still help the kids?" "Yes," I said firmly. "The children will always have me. But you will have only what you're willing to earn." He nodded slowly, the weight of my words settling. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw something in Sheldon I hadn't before possibility. If your son-in-law came to you stripped of pride admitting his failures, would you trust his words or wait to see if his actions matched them? Monday morning came gray and quiet, the kind of stillness that always seems to precede a storm. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee staring at the clock. 10:15 a.m. That was when Caroline and Sheldon had promised to come. They had until noon, my deadline for their decision. After that, I would let the foreclosure take its course. At exactly 10:12, I heard the rumble of their old Honda pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I saw them climbing out, shoulders slumped, their children in tow. Emma wore her school uniform, her small hand gripping her brother's sleeve as though the world might collapse without his presence. Tommy walked stiffly, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of his mother when she was young. Caroline knocked softly, and I opened the door. "Dad," she said, her voice hoarse. "We need to accept your offer. All of it." I stepped aside, and they entered. Emma and Tommy settled quietly on the couch, their eyes darting nervously between the adults. Caroline took her usual place in the armchair, while Sheldon remained standing, his posture that of a man walking into a courtroom. His business shirt was wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with fatigue. The bank called this morning. Caroline began, clutching her purse to her chest. 3 o'clock today, unless we pay 8,625ers. We don't have it. Emma tugged on my sleeve, her eyes wide. "Grandpa, are we really going to lose our house?" I knelt down, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart. But some things have to change." Sheldon cleared his throat, his voice low but steady. "Mark, I need to say something." He walked to the mantel and studied the wedding photograph of Martha and me, then turned back. 15 years ago, you offered to help us temporarily. I took that help and turned it into a permanent arrangement. I never acknowledged what you were giving up. I bragged to others about what wasn't mine, and I let your grandchildren believe I was providing for them when the truth was, it was you. His voice cracked. I disrespected you, and I disrespected the sacrifices you made. I can't undo that, but I can own it now. Caroline's hands trembled as she spoke. Dad, I owe you apologies, too. I treated your generosity like inheritance, as though I deserved it. I stopped saying thank you. I let Sheldon's pride overshadow my gratitude. I forgot that you were the reason my children had stability at all. Tommy looked at me, eyes wide with realization. Grandpa, you paid for my baseball, for everything. Caroline swallowed hard. Yes, Tommy. Grandpa paid for all of it. The room fell silent, heavy with truth. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I thought I'd lost hope. I stood slowly, my voice firm. If I help you today, it's not to save your lifestyle. It's to save your children's stability. You'll accept the conditions we discussed. No more adult bills through me. Public acknowledgement of my support. And regular family dinners here where respect is not optional. Sheldon nodded, once solemn. Caroline wiped her tears and whispered, We understand. If your family finally admitted their failures and begged for a second chance, would you give it or would you let them fall? The silence after Caroline's words lingered thick as molasses. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed hesitant. Then Sheldon straightened his hands, clasped behind his back like a man awaiting sentencing. Mark, he said, his voice low. If you help us keep the house today, I'll do what you asked. I'll acknowledge the truth. No more lies. I studied him carefully. For years he had stood before me with nothing but pride and arrogance. But now, with his children watching, I saw something different in his face. Fear, yes, but also humility, the kind born of desperation. Good, I said firmly. Then let's be clear. This is the last mortgage payment I'll ever make for you. After today, you either swim on your own or you sink. Caroline nodded quickly, tears still slipping down her cheeks. Emma leaned into her mother's arm, eyes wide with confusion. Mommy, why didn't you ever tell us Grandpa was helping? Caroline's lips trembled. Because we were ashamed, sweetheart. Not of Grandpa's help, but of how we acted like we didn't need it. Sheldon exhaled sharply, as though her honesty cut him as well. He turned toward his children, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard. Your grandpa is the reason you've had everything you've ever needed. I let you think it was me, but it wasn't. It was him. I owe him more than I can ever repay. Tommy's brow furrowed, trying to process the weight of his father's words. So, you pretended, yes, Sheldon admitted, his voice breaking. I pretended. I let the moment sit. It wasn't about humiliating Sheldon in front of his children. It was about forcing him to confront the reality he'd hidden from them. The truth would either free him or crush him. Time would decide. I walked to my desk, pulled out my checkbook, and set it down on the table with deliberate care. I'll call First National and arrange an emergency payment. That will stop the foreclosure for now. But listen to me carefully. If you fall behind again, I will not save you. You wanted to know how it feels to fail, Sheldon. If you don't change, you're going to find out. He swallowed hard and nodded. Caroline squeezed Emma's hand, whispering reassurances to her children that sounded more like promises to herself. I picked up the phone, dialed the bank, and spoke with the representative in my calm, practiced tone. Within minutes, the payment was arranged. The foreclosure clock stopped, for now. When I hung up, Emma whispered to her mother, "Are we going to be okay now?" Caroline's voice wavered, but her answer was steady. "Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be just fine." I leaned back in my chair watching them. For the first time, Caroline's gratitude didn't feel forced, and Sheldon's silence didn't feel defiant. It felt like humility. But humility without change was nothing. The real test would come in the weeks ahead. I folded my hands, letting the weight of the moment settle. Your lives start over today. Not with money. With respect. If your son-in-law finally confessed his failures in front of his children, would you forgive him or keep holding his pride against him? The living room was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I looked at my daughter and her husband, both worn down, both stripped of the pride that once filled every corner of this house. For years, I had been the silent provider. That ended today. I cleared my throat and spoke with deliberate weight. Listen carefully. I will continue paying for Tommy and Emma's school tuition, medical care, clothing activities. I'll even establish college funds for them so their future is secure. But for you two, the mortgage, the car loans, the insurance, those are your responsibility now. You will live within your own means, period. Caroline swallowed hard, nodding quickly, but Sheldon's jaw tightened. We'll manage, he muttered. But his eyes betrayed fear. There's more, I continued. This arrangement only stands if you acknowledge the truth. That means a letter to the community newspaper thanking me for 15 years of support. It means an honest post on social media. And it means face-to-face apologies to those you misled. If you can't humble yourselves publicly, then you don't deserve my private help. Sheldon's head snapped up. You want me to humiliate myself in front of the whole town? No, I replied evenly. I want you to tell the truth. You've spent years boasting about what you didn't earn. Now it's time to own up to it. That's not humiliation. It's integrity. Caroline's face crumpled, tears welling again. Dad, please. The children, I raised a hand to stop her. The children will be fine. I'll make sure of it. But they also need to see their parents own their mistakes. If they grow up thinking pride matters more than honesty, then they'll repeat the same cycle. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick, the weight of my words pressing down on them like stone. Finally, Sheldon broke the silence, his voice low, almost defeated. "We'll do it. The letters, the apologies. Whatever it takes." Caroline reached for his hand, her relief evident. Emma and Tommy watched their young faces full of questions they couldn't yet put into words. I looked at them at their innocence caught in the crossfire, and felt both sorrow and determination. "This is not about punishment," I told them softly. "It's about truth. You can't build a strong house on lies. It collapses eventually, just like yours almost did. But now you have a chance to rebuild. Smaller, maybe, but stronger." Sheldon nodded slowly, his pride stripped away piece by piece. Caroline whispered, "We'll do better, Dad. I promise." I rose to my feet, signaling the conversation was over. "Then go home. Start writing. You have until Saturday." As they left, Emma hugged me tightly around the waist. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said in a small voice. I kissed the top of her head, my throat tight. For the first time in 15 years, I felt not like an ATM, but like a father and grandfather again, drawing boundaries, demanding respect, and finally being heard. If you were in my shoes, would you have demanded public acknowledgement as I did, or been content with quiet, private apologies? 3 weeks later, my living room looked different, not in its furniture or the photographs on the walls, but in the people who now sat within it. Caroline arrived on time for our first family dinner under the new rules, her hair pulled back neatly, wearing a plain blouse instead of the designer outfits she once flaunted. Sheldon trailed behind her shoulders low, his business suit, traded for a simple button-down that looked like it had seen more than one shift at the office. And then there were Emma and Tommy bouncing in with the excitement only children could carry, holding up drawings they had made for me. "Grandpa, look," Tommy exclaimed. His picture showed a baseball bat and a small figure hitting a ball. "Coach says I'm getting better." Emma's drawing was simpler, a stick figure of me holding her hand. Underneath, she had scrawled in wobbly letters, "Thank you, Grandpa." I swallowed hard, pulling them both into my arms. It was a reminder that the sacrifices I made hadn't been wasted, even if the adults had forgotten to say thank you. Dinner was quieter than those old, extravagant celebrations. No polished mahogany table this time, just my modest dining table with roasted chicken potatoes and a simple salad. But in that quiet, there was something steadier. No laughter at my expense. No arrogance spilling from Sheldon's mouth. Just a family trying awkwardly to stitch itself back together. After the meal, Caroline pulled a folder from her purse and placed it on the table. "Dad, these are copies of the letters. One for the community newspaper, one for social media. We wrote them together." I opened the folder. The words were plain but honest. For 15 years, our family survived because of Mark Bennett's generosity. He carried our mortgage, our cars, our children's tuition, our medical bills nearly $1 million. We let pride and entitlement replace gratitude. We owe him acknowledgement and more than that, respect. Caroline's signature was shaky but genuine. Sheldon's name followed beneath it, written with reluctant strokes, but there nonetheless. I closed the folder and looked at them both. This is a start, but words mean nothing without actions. Sheldon nodded. "I know. I've started cutting expenses. The Civic's paid off and we're looking at downsizing to a smaller house. I also picked up extra hours at work. It isn't glamorous, but it's real." Caroline added, "I got promoted at the store. Shift supervisor. It's not much, but it feels good to earn something on my own." I studied them carefully. For the first time in years, their words weren't excuses. They were admissions, steps, however small, toward living honestly. Emma tugged at my sleeve. "Grandpa, are you proud of Mom and Dad now?" I looked around the table at my daughter's tired but determined face, at Sheldon's humbled posture, at the children's hope shining like candlelight. "I'm proud of all of you," I said softly, "because you're finally learning what it means to build instead of borrow." That night when they left, I stood at the window and watched the old Civic drive away. It didn't look like a downgrade anymore. It looked like a beginning. If your family finally started to change, would you trust it or wait for proof that the change was real? Summer arrived slowly, and with it came the rhythm of a new life for Caroline's family. Instead of vacations in Aspen or cruises across Europe, there were Saturday afternoons at the public park, Tommy chasing fly balls across the grass, and Emma twirling in the open field as if it were her private stage. They weren't flashy outings, but they were real. And for once, I could see my grandchildren happy without a price tag attached. 3 months after the confrontation, Caroline arrived at our monthly dinner carrying a manila folder. She placed it on the coffee table with quiet pride. "Dad, here's this month's budget. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, and the car payment all covered by our salaries. We even managed to set aside $200 in an emergency fund." I leafed through the pages, every line carefully accounted for. This wasn't the daughter who once called me in tears, begging for a credit card bailout. This was a woman learning to stand on her own feet. "Good work," I said softly, and I meant it. Sheldon, once so full of swagger, now spoke with a different tone. "I'm up for a promotion to regional director. It'll mean more responsibility, more travel, but also a better salary. I wanted to make sure Caroline and I could handle the children's schedules if I take it." He looked at me, not for approval, but for advice. That humility was worth more than any paycheck. The children ran in, then proudly waving their report cards. Straight A's for Tommy, a glowing note about Emma's artistic talent. They beamed as they showed me, and I felt Martha's absence as sharply as ever. She would have loved this moment, the children thriving, her daughter finally learning resilience. After dinner, Caroline lingered while Sheldon washed the dishes, a sight I never thought I'd see. She looked at me, her expression raw. "Dad, I can't thank you enough. Not just for the money, but for forcing us to face ourselves. It's humiliating to think how we treated you." I placed a hand on hers. "It's not humiliation, Caroline. It's growth. And growth rarely comes without pain." She nodded, tears in her eyes, then whispered, "Mom would be proud of you." The words settled deep in me like a balm over a wound I'd carried for 15 years. For the first time, I believed she was right. Later that evening, Emma slipped me a handmade card decorated with glitter and crooked hearts. Inside, in her careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for loving us, even when Mom and Dad forgot to say please." I read it twice before my vision blurred. That little card was worth more than the near $1 million I'd spent. Standing at my window after they left, I watched their old Civic disappear into the night. It no longer looked like a symbol of failure. It looked like a family finally walking their own road. I realized then that revenge had never been the true goal. Transformation was. And sometimes the sweetest justice isn't destroying those who hurt you, it's forcing them to become better. If your years of sacrifice finally led your family to real growth, would you call it revenge or redemption? Looking back, I've come to realize that the greatest revenge isn't measured in dollars withheld or in seeing others fall. True justice is when lessons finally take root, when pride gives way to humility, and when people who once mocked you learn to stand with respect. For 15 years, I poured nearly $1 million into Carolyn and Sheldon's lives, only to be repaid with silence, entitlement, and humiliation. But when I finally drew the line, the collapse of their world forced them to grow in ways my generosity never could. Today, Caroline works honestly, Sheldon faces his own responsibilities, and my grandchildren are learning the values of gratitude and effort. And me, I've reclaimed my dignity, not through shouting or spectacle, but through the quiet strength of saying enough. If there's a lesson here, it's this: love without boundaries becomes servitude, and generosity without gratitude becomes exploitation. If you're a parent or grandparent giving endlessly, remember sometimes the best way to love your family is by letting them struggle so they can finally learn to stand. Have you ever faced a similar moment when sacrifice turned into expectation? How did you handle it, and what did you learn? Share your story in the comments. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, respect is earned, not demanded. Thank you for listening.